And Jagat Purusha Prabhu has been practicing since 1969, 67.
70 is when I joined.
So he has been practicing Krishna consciousness since 1967, but more seriously from 1970. And he came to Chicago from Detroit and brought Lord Jagannath with him. So thank you very, very much, Jagat Purusha Prabhu, for taking the time for being here at this most auspicious occasion of Sri Shri Kishore Kishori's 50th anniversary. Yeah.
Should I just start a kirtan or should I just get into it?
You can start the kirtan,
Okay.
but I would like you to introduce yourself like a second time.
Okay.
Because many devotees who are
Yeah, yeah.
online have made the request that
Oh, okay. Hare Krishna. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Titi Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharene Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Asyacha Deshatarene Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Vasari Gaur Bhattavrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Vasari Gaur Bhattavrinda Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Kishore Kishore Jai Kishore 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 Jai Kishore Kishore Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Balaji Jaya Subhadra Jaya Golden Nitai, Golden Nitai, Golden Nitai, Jai Golden Nitai. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jai Jai Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Shishi Gaurishi Kishori Kishori ki jai, Jagannatha Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki jai, Shishi Gauri Thai ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Chanamane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesa Sunyavadi Paschidadasatane Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Saraswati Gaura Bhaktivinda Vanchukalpatrivasa Kripa Sindhu Bhevasha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. So first of all, let me offer all of you my most respectful obeisances at your feet. It's a huge, huge honor for me to be here for this occasion, to be in the presence of so many wonderful, stalwart, heroic Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis, who were so, many of you, instrumental in establishing this temple, in establishing the worship of Shri Shri Kishore Kishori. So my story is a little bit less known. So I get the privilege, I guess, of informing those of you who are not aware of the very early stage of this Chicago Yatra. So I have to give a little bit of a background. And I'm going to start out with a period of time that probably only one person in this room, aside from the deities and Srila Prabhupada, knows about, and that's Malati Prabhu. Because the story starts really in 1967, when I first encountered the devotees on the streets of San Francisco. And I had been in college in Boston. My sister had come to visit me right at the end of my first year of college. She had just completed her graduate studies. And she said she's going to San Francisco. And so this actually was 1966, in the spring of 1966. So I said, "Oh, really? You're driving?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Anybody else in the car?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Can I come?" She said, "Sure." So we drove together from Boston to San Francisco. This was, as I said, in the spring of 1966. So we lived there in the famous area of Haight-Ashbury, which was the epicenter of the countercultural movement in this country, in opposition to the Vietnam War and basically in opposition to everything that we grew up with. The so-called American dream, the so-called American way of life, the 9-to-5 routine, the raising of families and buying a nice house and a nice car and getting oneself situated so that one can, enjoy life and leave this world with nothing. So there in San Francisco, of course, I participated in all of the actions of the day, but I wasn't so inclined to many of the actions which produced very negative effects, such as drugs. Not that I didn't dabble, but I soon discovered this is really not my path. When I saw the devotees, they were like shining lights in a very dark place. And whenever I would see them, which was on several occasions, I would always go up and get a Back to Godhead magazine and give a donation. So I guess that was my first attempt at devotional service. Then when the temple opened, which was only 6 or 7 blocks from where I was living, and I just discovered it. I think that when the temple actually opened, I wasn't even aware of it, but happened to be walking by because it was in my neighborhood. So I looked in, and there was Lord Jagannatha, Baladev and Subhadra, these amazing, amazing figures standing in front of me, and I was just fascinated and very drawn to their glaze, to their gaze and their smile, and they're so beautiful. And so I remember before I actually came into the temple for any programmed feast or arti or anything like that, I just came in. It was quiet. It was during the day, and there was only one devotee in the temple and 2 guests. And the devotee was sitting behind a harmonium, and the 2 guests were sitting opposite, and they were having a conversation. And I just came in. There's no one else in the temple room. I came in and I sat down just quietly, and I listened to that conversation. And I realized that, wow, this is different than any other place in the world, any place that I had ever experienced. And it was because not only the atmosphere of the temple and the presence of the deities, but this conversation that I was overhearing. And I thought, gosh, I think this is maybe the first time in my life I've heard a real conversation, a meaningful, real conversation. I mean, here's people talking to one another, and they don't appear to be playing games. They don't appear to be, trying to play one-upmanship or prove to one another, what they know or what. It seemed to be so sincere and so real and so honest. And that really touched me. So subsequently, I came to several of the Sunday feasts. The first service that I was given was to vacuum the floor. There was a carpet. Malati, is this true? Do you remember there was a carpet on the floor in San Francisco? Oh, you put the carpet? Okay. Oh, okay. Did you buy it, or did you find it by other means? Okay. Okay. So my first service in the temple was to vacuum that carpet after the Sunday feast. The next time I came, I was given a more elevated service of going into the kitchen and washing pots. And that was ecstatic. So anyway, that's where I really was introduced to Krishna consciousness. I don't think I got beads at the time, but I started chanting from time to time. Then the next event that really anchored the holy name into my heart deeply was the mantra rock dance, which had been organized by Shamsundar Prabhu, Malati, and Guru Das and Jamuna and Mukunda, the early pioneers of San Francisco. And so my sister had a boyfriend at the time, and he had been an engineer. He became a hippie, hair down to his waist. But he was going to these festivals and putting on the light shows. He had developed techniques of putting on special light shows so that without having to take LSD, you could experience the LSD experience, because the walls would sort of come in and out, and he would put you into another state of consciousness. So I went to visit my sister at his apartment, and while I was there, he gave me a ticket. And he said, here, there's going to be a concert over at the Avalon Ballroom, and I've got some complimentary tickets, so take one. Now, I had gone to several of these concerts in the Fillmore and also in the Avalon, and I stopped going because they're so loud. so much marijuana smoke in the air, I just, I didn't need that anymore. But here's a free ticket. And I heard that, some of the biggest bands of the time were going to be there. So I thought, well, it's been quite some time, so I may as well go with the ticket. So I went there. As I entered, I got there a little bit after the concert had started. And as I walked in, I heard the voice of Janis Joplin. Nobody can mistake her voice, bellowing. She was with a group called the Big Brother and the Holding Company. And she was famous for her powerful, powerful, powerful voice. And so I came in and I took a seat in the back of the hall. It was completely filled. I heard later there was something in the region of 2,000 young people in the concert. And then during the intermission, things quieted down, and I was just sitting there and just kind of looking around, spacing out, I'm sure. And then I heard some commotion over at the entrance of the hall, and I looked over, and there's Srila Prabhupada. And I knew who Srila Prabhupada was. I'd been to the temple, I'd seen his pictures, and I had also seen the signs advertising the rock festival. Somehow I didn't connect those posters with the evening event. But wow, that's Prabhupada. And what struck me more than anything else, and I remember like it was yesterday, Srila Prabhupada was shining. He was shining. He was so pure. I just felt, wow, this is the embodiment of cleanliness. And I've always been a little bit of a fanatic when it comes to cleanliness, and I really appreciate it. I've never seen anybody so clean. That's the thought that came to my mind. So anyway, he was walking towards the stage with Allen Ginsberg, a very famous character at the time. He had come from Greenwich Village. He had actually traveled with Srila Prabhupada to introduce, because everybody knew who Allen Ginsberg was. So devotees wanted him to come to introduce Prabhupada to the young people of San Francisco. So they came on stage, and then devotees came with their mridangas, kartals, and all, and sat behind. And but at this time, there were no musicians around. They had all gone into the dressing room. And then Allen Ginsberg spoke, and he talked about Srila Prabhupada. And then he handed the mic to Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada spoke. And he spoke about the power of the holy name. I remember he said something about how the chanting of the holy name of God cleanses the heart from all the dust accumulated from many, many lifetimes. And but he spoke briefly, knowing that this is perhaps not the most attentive audience in the world. So, but he spoke briefly, and then sat down. And Allen Ginsberg, who knew to play harmonium, started the chanting. But he started the chanting, and then my sister's boyfriend projected the Mahamantra on the wall, so for all to see, so they could follow. And after some time of chanting, people gradually picking it up, very, very gradually. And then he slid the mic over to Srila Prabhupada, and then Prabhupada led the chanting, as I recall, I believe, for the rest of the period. The chanting went on for somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour. And I had always wanted in my life to experience a miracle, and I was convinced this was it, the miracle of miracles, because I felt that this Avalon Ballroom was no longer a part of this mundane world. I felt I was on a spaceship with all of these people led by Srila Prabhupada, and we had gone out of this universe completely. And we were not touched by any of the features or any of the limitations or anything of this material world. It was a miracle. So I think that was probably the time when I really took seriously the chanting of the holy name. So it took me some time. I felt that, I knew I wanted to become a devotee. I felt that maybe it wouldn't happen though in this life, because I felt so unprepared. I felt so unqualified, but maybe someday. So I actually left the city, and I was living on a sailboat on San Francisco Bay in Sausalito. I was there for about a year. Then I joined the Merchant Marines, and I shipped out for 1.5 years. But during that period, when I shifted from shipping in the South Pacific, I wanted a change of climate, so they put me onto another boat that took me up to San Francisco, and there I had to wait for about a month for another boat to take me up during the winter time to the coast of Alaska, to the Aleutian Islands, the Bering Straits in the winter. So there was definitely a change of climate. But while I was in San Francisco, I was staying in a hotel, waiting for the ship, and just wandering around town, and then I heard the sound of the Harinam. I thought, wow, the devotees are here. So I stood across the street watching the devotees. I was too shy to go over, but I just watched. And what I saw was so heartening. I was watching one devotee in particular who was selling Back to Godhead magazines. And I was identifying myself as a part of the counterculture, part of the young people of America. So I didn't relate so much to older people, to business people, to soldiers. I was relating more to people of my mindset. But I was watching this one devotee who was approaching everyone. Old ladies, soldiers, businessmen, hippies, men, women, children, with the exact same loving spirit. I thought, whoa, that's amazing. That's the way I want to be someday. I just loved the way that he was encountering everyone with such love, without making any distinctions. So I didn't encounter the devotees again for a few days, but then in the same location, I saw them again. I thought, okay, this time I'm going to walk around the block, come from behind, and join the kirtan party. So I stood behind, and I just was there in the kirtan. It was maybe for half an hour. Then the van came to pick them up, pick up the devotees to take them to the temple. And that same devotee I had been watching a few days before came up to me and said, would you like to come and visit the temple? And because it was him, and I had such a feeling about him and the way he was approaching me, just like he was approaching everyone, there's no way I could say no. So I said, sure. So I piled into the van, and we went to the temple, and it was quite interesting. So the first temple was San Francisco. That was Jagannatha, Baladev, and Subhadra. The second temple was, this was 1969, in the summer of 1969. The temple was a house, a converted house on Roosevelt Street near the university. And so this devotee, whose name was Upendra Prabhu. Upendra had been, I later found out, the personal servant of Srila Prabhupada. He had a lot of very intimate association with Srila Prabhupada. So we went into the temple, he took me in. Krishna, within his heart, guided him how to sort of give me a tour of the temple. I've always been involved in the arts. I mean, I was in college studying theater and studying art history. I've always been involved in the arts. So his way of giving me a tour through the temple was by taking me to every painting that was in the temple and explaining what's going on in that painting. And so for a half an hour, he just moved me around because they had a number of the original, BBT paintings. So I had this wonderful experience. And then I went back to my hotel. And then every few days, I would walk 5 miles to the temple. And then I thought, I want to be close to the temple. So I guess I must have found something in a newspaper where I found a rental property in a basement of someone's house a block away from the temple. So I got that, I moved in, and I was there for about 2 weeks so that I could go to the temple every day. And so then the ship came, and I had to leave. But before I left, I had been in an antique store in downtown Seattle, and I had encountered a deity of Krishna in the antique store. in a curio cabinet. And it was a murti about this large, and it was Kaliya Krishna, made of clay, beautifully, finely detailed and beautifully painted. So, Krishna himself is about this large, standing on top of Sesha, Kalinag, and then on a base. I thought it was so beautiful. So I spoke to the owner of the shop and I said, "Do you know who this is?" And he said, "Yeah, it's a statue from India." I said, "Yeah, but do you know who it is?" He said, "No." I said, "This is Krishna. This is the supreme personality of Godhead." I said, "Really?" I said, "Yes, really. And do you know that his home, he has a house here in Seattle?" I said, "No, I didn't know that. But I think that's where he belongs. Would you like to donate it to his house?" "No, not really." Well, I was charging like $50 or something. And I said, so I explained to him about the temple and about a little about the philosophy, what little I knew. And so he gave me a good discount. I think I got it for around $20. And I took it. I was taking it to the temple. So this was my first experience in becoming Krishna's driver. I had several good fortunes after that, but this was the first one where I was driving in my little Volkswagen Beetle that I had acquired, going to the temple. But I was halfway there and a car went through a stop light right in front of me. I screeched on the brakes. Luckily, didn't hit the car, but the box that I was carrying Krishna went like this. And I thought, "Oh no." And I looked in the box. Krishna's head had broken off the murti. And I felt so bad. I just cried. So then instead of going to the temple, I went to my apartment and I took immediately, I went to an art supply store and I got glue because it was a very clean break. It hadn't shattered into pieces. I got the glue and some matching paint and I put it back on. I realized while I was fixing it, there were other lines indicating it had broken before. So it was a weak spot. I fixed the deity, got it all ready, the glue dried, did it all painting. You couldn't notice anything. And it was time to take the deity to the temple. And I got a call that my ship would be ready at 5:00 the next morning. So then I decided, okay, well, I have to take the deities in the evening, but it was pouring down rain. It was like a huge thunderstorm going on. The temple was only a few blocks away, but how was I going to take these deities in this box in this heavy rain? So I put on my raincoat and I walked a couple of blocks to the street where the temple is on, and I put out my thumb, hoping I could get a ride. Well, there was only a car coming maybe every 20 minutes. And this was in the evening time before I left for the ship. One car went by, didn't stop. Another car went by, didn't stop. And then the station wagon went by. It also didn't stop. And no other car came for about 10 minutes. And then a car came, and it was a station wagon. And it was the same station wagon that had passed me before. And he rolled down the window and he says, "Where are you heading?" I said, "Just a few blocks up the street, but I have something which I need to bring. Can I bring it and put it in your car?" Luckily, it was a station wagon, so it fitted. He said, "Yeah, sure, go get it." So I got it, I brought it up, I had it covered with the plastic, put it in his car, and then put it on the porch of the temple. And I had written a little mark. I thought it was really very egotistical of me if I was to reveal who had brought the deity. So I just put a little sign. I think I said, "Hare Krishna," that's all. And I just left it on the porch. And then I came back, and the next morning I got on the ship. So after about 4 months working on that ship, I thought, okay, I've had enough of this. My time is up in the Merchant Marines. I don't know what's next, but I got off the ship. I was in Alaska. I had never been to Fairbanks. It was in December of 1969. I thought, maybe I should go and visit Fairbanks. This may be the closest I'll ever be. Daily temperature in Fairbanks during my stay was 40 degrees below zero. And there was 1 hour of sunlight during the day. and the rest was black, dark. It was quite an experience. I was there for about maybe 10 days. And then while I was sitting on the edge of my bed in the hostel where I was staying, a voice came to me that said, "Go home." I thought, what? Go home? What is that supposed to mean, go home? He said, and it repeated, it said, "Go home." I mean, I hadn't seen my parents for a couple of years, but I certainly didn't consider their home to be my home. But I thought, I better listen to that voice because there may be something in there that for me to know. So I went back to Seattle, picked up my car, which was in storage, and I drove back up to Canada, drove across the highway, averaged 20 degrees below zero during this entire trip, drove over the Rocky Mountains, encountered severe blizzards while I was in the Rocky Mountains, going on hills, mountains like this. I was in this small Volkswagen Beetle. It went out of control on 2 occasions, just sliding on the icy roads. It was hitting against snowbanks. Fortunately, there were snowbanks, so I didn't careen into any ravines. But the car rolled over on 2 different occasions and completely smashed in on both sides so that I couldn't even get out of the car other than climbing through the window, which I did, and I pushed the car back on its feet, and I drove that car, which was just a mangled piece of metal, but it ran perfectly. You know, Volkswagen engines are known for running. And I made it all the way back to Michigan, which my parents were living in the suburb of Detroit called Grosse Pointe. So I got within 3 miles of their house and the car broke down. It just died. So I coasted over to the side, got my backpack, which had all my worldly belongings, and I walked to the nearest gas station and I called a taxi and took a taxi. So a few days later, after, being there with my parents, my mother needed to have something from Hudson's, which was the department store right downtown on Woodward. So I said, "Mom, I'll get it for you." So I didn't have a car at the time, so I took the bus. Got down to the bus, afternoon on a winter day, a couple of feet of snow on the ground, approaching downtown Detroit, and then I heard that sound again. And all the hair on my body stood on end just hearing the sound of kirtan. I first heard the kartals. I thought, whoa, devotees are here. I had no idea the devotees were in Detroit. So I remember I jumped up and I told the driver, "Stop, I've got to get off." And he said, "Sit down, boy. We're coming to a stop. You can get off there." So I waited, got off the stop, and I just ran. I couldn't see the devotees, but I could hear the sound. I just ran for the sound. And then I saw the devotees. I offered my obeisances in the snow. I got up and I ran. I just jumped into the kirtan. And the devotees looked around and they had no idea, where I had come from, but I just had appeared. So Sri Govinda, Prabhu, Lakshmi Narayan, Bhagavan, and several others were doing kirtan right in front of Hudson's. Apparently that was a favorite spot. In the dead of winter, probably, in the teens, wearing, gloves, mittens, but playing mridangas and jumping up and down and having kirtan. So then the end of the day came. The similar way that what happened in Seattle, the Sankirtan vehicle came to pick up the devotees. And I was just going to go to the temple with the devotees. Then I remembered, oh no, I've got to get something from my mother before the stores closed. But one of the devotees gave me a card that had the address of the temple. So I did what I needed to do, took a bus home, and the next morning I got up early in the morning, and I got the earliest bus into town, maybe 5 o'clock or so in the morning. And it was dark, but I found the temple, went into the temple, and there's Lord Jagannath. So the first temple was Lord Jagannath. The second temple was Lord Jagannath in Seattle, because they had small Jagannath deities, and the third temple in Detroit was also Lord Jagannath. So I was there in the temple, and I just felt so much at home. So I was coming to the temple almost daily, and I found a way. I thought, well, what can I do in the way of devotional service? I wouldn't stay there during the day so much because I had been away from my parents' home for so long. I didn't want them to feel that I was just there for a few days and then, abandoning them again. So I was at home during the day, but then coming to the temple in the morning for the morning program. And I had some skills in carpentry, so I found things to do utilizing my father's wonderful workshop, building things for the temple. Like one thing I noticed was the mridangas were sitting on the floor of the temple. And I had learned that all the mridangas, the kartals, all the instruments, they are expansions of Lord Balaram. And I thought, why is Lord Balaram being put on the floor? So I built cradles, wooden cradles for the mridangas. And other things that I just found I could do that would be of some benefit to the temple. So I was coming regularly then to the temple, and I don't know exactly at what point, but all the money that I had earned from the merchant marines, because they paid very well, and I had saved every penny. Because at that time, I was following the regulatory principles, and I was chanting all the time I was on the ship. So I had put, I think it was in the region of $3,000 to $4,000 into the bank for maybe future emergencies or for future use. But once I realized that how important the temple was, and that this is my real family, and that this somehow or other is going to be my future. So I took all the money out, except I kept $300 back, but the rest I put in an envelope. I came to the temple and I gave it to Bhagavan, the temple president. He thanked me very much. He went upstairs. About 2 minutes later, he came back and paid his obeisances. He gave me a big hug, because it was back in those days, that was a large amount of Lakshmi. So I was coming regularly to the temple, but then I started getting lazy. My parents' home was a very comfortable place to be there in the suburbs of Detroit. And I stopped coming for a couple of weeks to the temple. And looking back at this time, I've realized that, how it is said that once one becomes a devotee, that Maya will stand at the threshold of the door, wanting to serve the devotee. So, I certainly wasn't in that stage to be served by Maya, but indirectly, she was serving me because I was definitely in Maya. For that period of time, not going to the temple, I was feeling lazy. Not that I was breaking principles, but I was just being lazy and being totally mental and not going to the temple. And then I get a phone call from the temple president saying, Jackson, I was Bhakta Jackson. I said, Jackson, I have a favor to ask of you. I said, what is that? He said, well, we need to take 3 devotees to Chicago to start a temple. And you've got a car. By that time, I had gotten another Volkswagen Beetle. You have a car, and you have some carpentry skills. So I wonder if you would drive those devotees to Chicago. And when you get there, because we've rented a property, it's a storefront property, when you get there, if you could do some renovation of the building. And I said, of course, I will do that. Krishna's mercy. I've got some service. So I drove these 3 devotees, Rudra Prabhu, his wife Radhika, who was doing pujari service in the temple, and a young Vaishnavi by the name of Ichamati. And she had been helping to make the deity outfits there in Detroit. So their roles were going to be, Rudra would be the temple president, Ichamati or Radhika would be the head pujari, and Ichamati would make the outfits. And I would be their driver. But they weren't the only passengers. We were also to bring Lord Jagannatha, Baladev, and Subhadra. I don't know where the deities came from. I don't know who carved the deities. I don't know if they came from India. That part I don't know. And I would love to find out if anybody knows. I was actually thinking that maybe I'd try to get hold of Bhagavan, because certainly he would know. But there I was as Krishna's driver once again, not only driving Krishna, but driving Krishna's beloved servants. This is 1970. This was spring of 1970. So we came to the storefront building on North Halsted in Chicago. Came into the building, and I remember it being not in very good condition. There's a lot of work to be done. So I remember putting up some plaster walls, putting in some new flooring, fixing plumbing, whatever needed to be done. And then coming to the temple room, which was on the ground floor, putting in the floor there, and then building the altar and building the Vyasasan. So it was a totally absorbing service for me. Morning until night, I was there working while the devotees were going out, doing Harinam and distributing magazines and books, because by that time, they had at least the Bhagavad Gita. They may have even had first canto. They did, definitely had first canto Srimad Bhagavatam as well. So I would go out with the devotees chanting and distributing books and prasadam on usually one day a week during the 2 to 3 months that I was there. When that work was completed, it was time for me to leave. And I was planning to go back to Detroit. But word came to New Vrindavan that there was a carpenter in Chicago, and there was a desperate need of assistance for building a large pavilion, because at that time the temple was preparing for a Janmashtami, and Srila Prabhupada was scheduled to be present. And they were expecting that all the devotees from all the temples around the East Coast and Midwest were going to be there. So they needed to build a large pavilion where devotees could take rest under cover. So Sudhanu Prabhu, who's still there in New Vrindavan, was the main carpenter along with Bhagavat Ananda. But I became the assistant to Sudhanu Prabhu, building this pavilion and also doing some renovation work on the house, an A-framed house where Srila Prabhupada was going to stay. Well, it turned out that Srila Prabhupada didn't come. He ended up going to Los Angeles, and then I believe through Japan and then to India. It was a very interesting time in New Vrindavan. So you might think that my story is over because I've delivered the devotees and the deities, I've done the renovation work, but it's not. Because I was there in New Vrindavan for 2 to 3 months. The work was completed there. We had Janmashtami. It was an unusual Janmashtami because a group of sannyasis came and they were preaching a very strange philosophy and created a lot of confusion. They somehow had become poisoned with the idea that Srila Prabhupada is not just a servant of Krishna, but is Krishna himself. And they wanted to straighten all of us out. Now, I was a new bhakta, so this is all pretty wild stuff for me. But there were a lot of very seasoned devotees there, so there were a lot of arguments. And I was watching, seeing these arguments fly back and forth. Brahmananda was really, he had a way of, if he wanted to make a point, he would shove it down your throat if necessary. And there was, near violence taking place. And I thought, oh, this is too much for me to see these kinds of interactions between devotees. So I was at the time, I would take rest at night in the cow barn on hay. And so I retreated from this battlefield and I went to the cow barn and I got out my Bhagavad Gita and I said, I don't know who's right in all of this, but I know that Krishna knows everything. So let me just read Bhagavad Gita. So that's how I kind of took shelter. That $300 that I had saved back, when I came to New Vrindavan, I brought it with me and I gave it to Hayagriva Prabhu for safekeeping because he had a safe in his quarters where he was staying. And he said, whenever I needed it, I could take it back. So after Janmashtami, perhaps I stayed for another week or so, and then it was time for me to leave. I had no further service to do there. Although, devotees thought maybe I would want to stay, but somehow or other, I had not stayed. Now, here's another little interesting part of that history. When I was on the ships working in the merchant marines, I kept a shaved head. I would shave my head every week. And for me, it was just a sign of, it was renunciation. I didn't have a sikha. I just had a shaved head. So when I got to the temple with a shaved head, devotees were surprised. I had a shaved head, but when they saw the back of my head, it didn't have a sikha. And back in those days, if you have a shaved head without a sikha, it means either you're a Buddhist or a Mayavadi. And devotees were not comfortable with that. So I didn't, no, I thought, okay, I'm going to let my hair grow out. Because I didn't feel I was ready to keep a sikha. Because for me, that was a sign of complete surrender. And I didn't feel that I was completely surrendered. I wanted to be a devotee. I wanted to be with the devotees. I wanted to serve the deities, but I didn't feel I was quite there. So I let my hair grow out. So during that whole period in New Vrindavan, I probably had 1 inch or 2 inches of hair on my head. Then I thought, okay, now I feel I have 1 foot in Krishna consciousness and 1 foot out. And it was a very uncomfortable situation for me. So I decided to leave the temple. And I decided that I'm not going to come back to the temple until I'm ready to surrender and give everything, because I don't want to be in this halfway position. So I made a decision. I thought, okay, where can I go? And I couldn't think of any place in this entire world where I could be comfortable if it's not a temple and not with devotees. And I was perplexed, because I wasn't going to go to a temple unless I was fully surrendered. Then I thought about this little private school that I had gone to in my teenage years from grade 7 until 9. It was a very small, a very, very liberal school, and it was full of arts and music and focus on bringing out the best of every student. And they were wonderful people. There was a lot of piety there. And I thought, well, maybe I can go to that school, and maybe they have a couple of horses there. Maybe I can take care of the horses. I can get a job there, and I can just practice chanting, and I can read. And when I'm ready to join the temple, I'll go and join the temple. So, of course, I didn't have any transportation at the time. I think I had sold my car. I don't know what happened to it, or gave it away. So I decided I will walk from New Vrindavan to Short Hills, New Jersey, which is, walking across West Virginia, and then walking maybe across part of Ohio, and then across all of Pennsylvania, and then across New Jersey into this Chatham, which is 20 minutes from New York City. And I had my beads, but before I started the journey, I went to Hayagriva, and I said, Prabhu, I'm leaving now. Can I have the Lakshmi? And he said, where are you going? And I said, I'm taking a long walk, and I want to wait until I feel I'm ready, completely ready to come to the temple to serve Srila Prabhupada. And he said, so you're not going to a temple? I said, no, not right now. That means you're not going to serve Krishna. I said, well, I am, but I'm going to be chanting. Yeah, but you're not going to a temple. You're not going to be with devotees. This money is Krishna's money. It's not yours. So if you're going to use this money in Krishna's service, then yes, take it. But I don't see that happening. You're not going to a temple. He wouldn't give me the money. I said, Prabhu, you promised you would give it to me. Yeah, but this is a principle. This is a higher principle. Okay, Hare Krishna. But I had kept $10 in my pocket. So that's all the money I had was $10. So I started walking. And I walked and walked and walked. I walked for 3 days, and I had my backpack, I had a sleeping bag, and I had enough prasadam to last me for a few days. And I was chanting the whole time, at every step, chanting. And I was walking on these country roads. I must have had a map so that I would find my way. I didn't want to go on a highway. And eventually I came to a town. And it was the first town I came to. It was my 3rd day of walking. And it was hot, blazing hot, sweating. But I had a long ways to go. So I just kept on walking. I walked through the town. And on the right side of the street, I was walking on the left, on a sidewalk, I saw a Dairy Queen. I was hot. I was hungry. And that Dairy Queen looked so attractive. But I forced myself to look away and look straight ahead and chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Because back in the day, if you eat ice cream from outside, it is like committing the most grievous possible sin. I mean, this is Maya, big Maha Maya. So I forced myself to not stop, not to hesitate, just keep on walking. So I kept on walking. I tried to control my mind, but it was difficult. I was walking out of town, but my mind was standing in line at the Dairy Queen. But I kept on walking and chanting the whole time, but my mind would not get out of that line. And behind me in that line was a very attractive young girl. She was also waiting to get an ice cream cone. But I kept on walking. I had left the town physically, but my mind was still in front of that Dairy Queen. And I got my ice cream. And she got her ice cream. There was nobody else with her, so we ended up sitting down together and sharing our ice cream cones and talking. And wow, we had a lot in common. She was a beautiful young woman. And we got to really like each other. So we ended up walking off together. So I'm way beyond the town at this point, and yet I'm now with her in my mind. And we ended up getting married and having a family. And I had to get a job. And we had to get a house and a car. My life went before me. And I got so involved and so entangled with the children, with the wife, and with the needs. And I lost my mind. My mind was completely left. I had left my mind in that world. And then Srila Prabhupada's voice came to me. So when we were working there in New Vrindavan, we always had speakers attached to the trees, and we would listen to Prabhupada's lectures. And so the voice that came to me was Prabhupada's voice in a lecture talking about the fire and the sparks in the fire. That when the sparks, as long as they remain in the fire, they remain fire. But if the spark ever leaves that fire, it's only a matter of time that that spark will go out and lose its fiery nature. And I looked at myself and I thought about this life that I had just experienced. And I thought about me as a spark having left the association of devotees, thinking that I'm going to stay out of that association until I'm ready to come back into the fire. And hearing Prabhupada's words, it's only a matter of time that that spark is going to go out. And I thought, oh no, I can't take that chance. So I turned around and I came back into the town. And I found out that there was a Greyhound station in the town. So I went to the Greyhound station, went to the counter, and I said, how much will it cost me to catch a bus to Chicago? I had $10, at all I had. She opened the book. She looked down no computers then. She looked down the columns and she said, let's see, from here to Chicago, that'll be $10. I gave her my $10. I got on the bus and went to Chicago. So I don't know how many miles the North Halstead storefront building is from downtown, from what was then the bus terminal. May not be still there, but it was quite a long walk. But I didn't have a penny. But I was ready to walk hundreds of miles anyway, so walking 5 miles was not a big deal. So I put on my backpack and I walked to the temple. I got there, it must have been around 9 o'clock in the evening. And this was late summer. So it was just, I believe, like it was dusk. So the temple door was open. I walked inside. I walked upstairs to the brahmachari ashram, and there all the devotees are up there in their gamshas, getting ready to take rest. And I take off my backpack. They're surprised to see me. Of course, they all knew me because I had been there a few months before. Some new faces were there, but Rudra was there, the temple president. I recognized, one or two others. We all offered obeisances. And then the first thing that I said to Rudra Prabhu was, "Can you shave me up? And leave a sika." So, this was the aftermath of, bringing the deities, bringing the devotees, and helping to get the temple established. But this was the most important moment for me. And this is why being here is a huge honor for me. Because, and I was telling a little bit of this story to someone a few weeks ago, and they said, "Wow, you were baptized here in Chicago." That getting shaved up and leaving that intention was like my baptism. It was my surrender. And so I am eternally grateful to this temple, and to the deities here, to the devotees here, because this is where I think I had this is where I was born again, in a sense. And so I was then with the devotees for possibly a week, not much longer than a week, because then word went back to Detroit that I had left New Vrindavan and I had come to Chicago, and Bhagavan wanted me back in Detroit. So then I went back to Detroit, stayed for the remainder of 1970. The devotee who had been my close friend and mentor and associate from the earliest days in Detroit was Narottamananda Prabhu. He was the cook, and I would borrow my mother's vehicle, which was like a minivan, a Ford Deluxe Club Wagon, and I would take him to the market for shopping every week. And so it was wonderful to go back to Detroit and see my dear friends, Sri Govinda Prabhu, who I always very often think of. He was, again, another one of my mentors. Lakshmi Narayan, the two of them were sort of inseparable companions in Sankirtan for Harinam and for book distribution. And Sri Govinda Prabhu, if you're listening, I offer you my humble obeisances. I think he is. He may not remember this, but one of the little projects that I completed at home just to be engaged in devotional service while I was at my parents' house was because I had been in the Merchant Marines and I had made friends with the bosun who was the head of the deck crew, and he took a liking to me and he taught me the art of sewing all different kinds of stitches. And so I learned how to not only make sailor bags and all kinds of things, but I made trousers, I made shirts out of canvas because I had all the canvas that I wanted there on the ship. So when I was thinking about things that I could do for the temple, Sri Govinda at the time was in charge of selling, raising funds for the temple by selling spiritual sky incense. And he had, as I recall, I don't know, a dozen or maybe 20 different kinds of incense. And he would have them in a bag, but they were all just, kind of together. And I thought of a way that I could make a bag with compartments out of canvas. Compartments, so all the different kinds of incense. I don't know if you remember that, Sri Govinda, but that was my one of the services to a great Vaishnav that helped to anchor me in this Krishna consciousness family. So that is my story, and the story of how Lord Jagannath, Baladev and Subhadra came to Chicago, how I was blessed by the opportunity to serve here in Chicago. I ended up becoming the cook in Detroit, and then I was given the opportunity to go to India in 1972. So I went there. I was supposed to go to Mayapur, but they didn't have a cook in Bombay, so I became the cook. It was going to be temporary for a month or two, but I ended up being the cook there for 2 years, and then Pujari, and then life membership and organizing dramas, and I was there for 10 years, and then to England for 12 years, and then back to Detroit, where I was involved in organizing Rath Yatras. I had an art gallery in the town of Grosse Pointe, which is a suburb of Detroit, very close to the temple, and ended up moving down in North Carolina, where I am now, and continued to serve Lord Jagannatha by providing Jagannatha chariot to temples around the country for Rath Yatras. So I continue to engage in their service, and I continue to pray for the mercy of all the devotees to keep me always engaged at the lotus feet of the deities and of all of you. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Can you hear me, Jagat Purusha? Can anybody hear me? I'm trying to speak. Jagat Purusha Prabhu.
Shri Govinda Prabhu, Hare Krishna Maharaj, Hare Bol.
God, I have to scream, I guess. But please accept my humble obeisances
Please accept
at your
mine.
great transcendental serving feet.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Jagat Purusha, you've always been like the personification of service. Your whole energy, your whole life has to do with giving and service. And you're talking about those walks. I was thinking, this is like a transcendental, highly artistic, highly intelligent Forrest Gump. That's a joke.
I get it.
Yeah. So anyway, I was distracted by some phone calls. Did you tell them what happened to the sannyasis in Vrindavan after that was?
No, I didn't. It was going to be too long of a story, perhaps, to include that. Yeah, they were all rejected. So you most probably were in Detroit when they came to Detroit and they were told to leave, right?
Well, what happened was Prabhupada told us to bring them to Detroit and lock them up for like at least 2 weeks. I forget exactly.
Yeah.
So if you remember, my treasury room was up in the attic, but
Right.
down the hall from the treasury room was a big open room. And I forget how many, maybe 6 sannyasis or something. I locked them in there and they couldn't leave. Prabhupada said they could not leave. But I brought them prasadam like 3 times a day. and and then after about I think 2 weeks or something, they were all told to go to each individual places and just travel and preach.
Yeah.
But I remember during that time, I had the Bhagavad Gita open when they were saying that philosophy, and I was saying, this can't be right, this can't be right. And I was trying to find quotes from Bhagavad Gita, and I forget exactly how it transpired, but they were, like you said, they were very heavy. And I forget if I was initiated or not, maybe I was, but it was really difficult. But I knew in my gut it was wrong, but I didn't have the capacity at that time to argue with them.
Yeah.
But finally, somehow, I don't remember the circumstances, but somehow or other, Srila Prabhupada heard about it.
Yeah,
and was
Jagadish.
really angry and really blasted them.
Jagadish Prabhu. Jagadish was the one apparently to inform Srila Prabhupada what was going on.
Aha.
Yeah.
Jagadish Prabhu was sent to Toronto from Detroit. He came to Detroit with Bhagawan and his wife to open a center. And he was with his wife. Jagadish was with his wife. I forget her name. Do you remember?
Jagadish's wife? Huh? Lakshmi Moni. Yeah, Lakshmi Moni.
Oh, Lakshmi Moni, right. Anyway, they were sent to Detroit to start a center. And Bhagawan had been accepted to medical school at Wayne State University.
Right.
So he was going to become a doctor. And he began his studies. I think he was still studying when I joined in November of 1969. Anyway, after a few months, it became obvious that the temple was growing. So there was so much energy there. Things were really increasing. So he dropped out of school. And at maybe after maybe early 1970, Jagadish was sent to Toronto to start a center in Toronto.
Right.
And
Well, I came.
and-
I came in January, and Jagadish was not there. I came in January of '70.
oh, so maybe it was before that. Maybe it was before that. My brain is pretty fogged. Um, what was I going to say?
Wow.
I lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry.
If anybody has anything to say for a minute, let me regain my train of thought. Oh,
Yeah.
Bhagwan.
So
Oh, right. I just wanted to say that in at the beginning of 1971, Bhagwan told Lakshmi Narayan, my friend, and me, who were brahmacharis, we were like, sorry, we were brahmacharis, and we were strong brahmacharis. You're not gonna get married. And Bhagwan said, no, you have to get married. Prabhupada said, everybody gets married. I order you to get married. So we said to Bhagwan, no, we're not going to do that. I see that in New York, there's so many brahmacharis, we're just going to go to New York. And Bhagwan said, I forget if he showed me something or what, but he said, you have to follow the GBC. That's directly, Srila Prabhupada has given authority you have to follow. So after some time arguing and back and forth, Lakshmi Narayan and I both accepted. And I was initially set up to marry a girl in Toronto, but like in the last week before she was to come to Detroit, they found out that she was like 2 months older than me.
Huh.
So they made an arrangement for another lady to be my wife, and that was Sri Lanka,
wow.
who was in Toronto. And I can remember the night before our marriage, she came on a bus to Detroit. She was stopped at the border by the border guards. Somehow or other, they wouldn't let her in. So I had to drive across the border. This was at the tunnel in Detroit. So I had to drive across the border in the tunnel to pick her up. And I can remember when I came to pick her up, there she was wearing like overalls and with a straw hat. And I thought, oh my God, what am I getting into? And then, anyway, then we drove to the bridge and crossed the bridge and came back. And the next day we were married. I don't know how I got distracted by that. That's the story of Jagadish in Toronto. So Jagadish Prabhu was able to bring Sri Lanka to Krishna consciousness. And then between Bhagwan and Jagadish, they made that arrangement. So my marriage was totally arranged. And it lasted 36 years until I took sannyas in 2006. And it was an amazing thing because the thrust of both of our lives was service to Srila Prabhupada. So the linkage there was deep in the heart and irrevocable, because service to Prabhupada was our life. And as the marriage was arranged under not directly by Prabhupada, but under Prabhupada's order, we all just had to work things out. There was no question of any problems, because those are all like secondary things. The service was the primary thing. So in that, the whole idea of arranged marriage has merit if there's a central spiritual thrust. Otherwise, I don't think it works. I think in a lot of cases, things have not worked out with that. I think that was stopped. Do they still do arranged marriages?
Pardon?
Do you know?
What was the question? Oh, I don't think so. I think we learned too many lessons. I mean, my marriage was arranged in Bombay, and I learned many, many years later that Srila Prabhupada was very unhappy with it. He said it was not a good match. And therefore it didn't last. I remarried, and I've been remarried now for more than 40 years. And we've had a wonderful, family life in Krishna consciousness with some very Krishna conscious children. But arranged marriage is not a simple matter. It's very, very complex. It requires a lot of qualification on the part of either parents or elders, authorities. And back in those days, there was no such consideration. I was married because there was need that we were going to have a big pandal in Bombay, and the previous pandal had a wedding, and it was really popular among all the people. So they wanted to have another wedding. And I had mentioned to my temple president about several months before that I thought that someday I should probably get married. I just felt it would be a better position for me. So then when the discussion took place, when they were organizing this festival and they wanted to have a wedding, they thought, who can we get married? And Giriraj said, well, Jagat Purusha had mentioned that he wants to get married. Well, who's he going to marry? Well, there was only one girl available. So I said, well, let's put them together. And then we got married in front of 20,000 people in the Pandal in Bombay. And we had a wonderful daughter, Rasapriya, who's in Alachua, who's a beautiful family. Gandiva, who I had married, she has passed on. And of course now I remarried many years ago. And so, marriage is something that has to take into consideration the nature of the boy, the nature of the girl, what are their horoscopes, what are their backgrounds, what are their families, what are their, so many things to be taken into consideration. And none of those things were even considered at all. So it's not a wonder that many of the arranged marriages did not work out. But Sri Govinda Maharaj, you are a shining example of an exception. Yeah. I mean,
Don't say that, I'm a sannyasi.
Huh? You're a sannyasi, of course, but
I'm joking.
No, I mean, you've shown the perfect example of a successful marriage, which ends up in sannyas. I mean, that's the way it's meant to be. That's the Vedic system. It's wonderful. And but I also, not only do I remember you very, very, very fondly as part of my own personal history in Krishna consciousness, but I remember Sri Lekha also, and what a beautiful, wonderful Mataji she was and is. I don't know where she is, but I would love to see her. I'd love to see you someday again.
Yeah. And Sudarshan, you remember Sudarshan?
Of course. Your son, where is he?
He's 51.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
I remember him.
What a mind-boggling thing. But Sudarshan was a blessing, and he met Srila Prabhupada 2 times. The first time we had to go to Los Angeles because some devotee in Chicago had stolen a car and all of our funds, and he was caught by the FBI. So I had to go to LA to pick up the car. So I went with Sri Lekha and Sudarshan at that time. He was maybe 2. And we got to see Srila Prabhupada. I think I told this story to the devotees there already once, but it's worth hearing again. Anyway, Sudarshan came in to Srila Prabhupada's desk. I don't know do you remember Prabhupada's desk arrangement in LA?
No, I mean, I wasn't there in LA. I was in India. From 72 until 81, I was in India all those years.
All right. You're one of those dyed-in-the-wool Indian Vaishnavas. It was really fantastic. Anyway, Sudarshan ran up to Prabhupada's desk and pointed to a picture of Bhakti Vinod and said, Banod, Banod. And Prabhupada said, he knows Bhakti Vinod.
Wow.
And then Sudarshan lost it and started shuffling everything on Prabhupada's desk and knocking it off and so many things. And Sri Lekha grabbed him and dragged him out, screaming like a 2-year-old. Terrible twos, right? Yeah. And in the presence of Prabhupada, so I was so embarrassed, mortified. sitting there with my head down, and Srila Prabhupada says to me, "You can tell he's very intelligent."
Huh.
And I was like, "Huh?" I looked at him quizzically, and Prabhupada said, "Because he is a big rascal."
Uh, yeah.
And then at a later time in Dallas, I had gone to Dallas after I left Chicago, and maybe we just had arrived, I forget, but I walked with Srila Prabhupada back to his room from the place outside where he was speaking. And when we got to the door, Prabhupada rubbed Sudarshan's head and said, he will read all my books, learn Sanskrit, and become beyond PhD, LLD.
Wow.
So finally, at University of Sudarshan studied Sanskrit and read all of Prabhupada's books, and he's a very deeply dedicated Vaishnava. It's amazing to see how, I'm sure you've seen it repeatedly, how Krishna sends these like amazing personalities to join your family to help you in Krishna consciousness.
Yep.
Right? The son is Putra, the daughter is Putri. It means they deliver us from hell, and I believe that.
Yeah.
Srila Prabhupada really was, gave emphasis that, these children, by their development of Krishna consciousness, will, ultimately save the mission of Krishna consciousness all over the world.
We should stop now.
And Sudarshan is engaged like that.
Okay. Okay. Jai Maharaj, thank you so much for that.
Jagat Purusha, I have a question.
Yes, Maharaj.
I'm confused about Jagannatha. So there was the Jagannatha that originally went to Chicago, but then the temple closed. Did they come back to Detroit?
I don't know. I mean, when I left Chicago, they were here. When I came back after New Vrindavan, they were here. And then I haven't seen them until a couple of years ago when I came here a few years ago for Rath Yatra, and I saw them. So they didn't come back to Detroit that I'm aware of. Didn't they go to Evanston after the North Halstead temple closed?
It probably is that. I can't clearly remember. But the Halstead Temple closed, and I think it was some months afterwards we came to Chicago, but without deities. And then we got that building in Evanston, and I remember maybe it was January of '72, we had this big festival for the installation of Jagannatha in the front hallway of the temple there, and it must be that those were the Jagannaths. But you brought some Jagannaths this time, is that right?
I brought the Jagannath deities from Detroit in 1970, along with Rudra, Radhika, and Ichamati.
Yeah.
And I've been all the time have been assuming these are the deities.
Sorry, I have to depart for just a minute. I'll come right back.
So I think we're going to take a break, and for 10 minutes, and then there will be Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur Katha after this, and then Pushpanjali. Okay, Hare Krishna.
Let's praise Jagat Purusha Prabhu ki jai, Shri Kishore Kishori ki, Sri Jagannatha Sri Baladev Srimati Subhadra Maharani ki, Srila Prabhupada ki. So, as was explained, we're taking 10 minutes break, and then we have His Grace Hari Parshad Prabhu. Oh, here.
Hare Krishna. So we won't be taking a 10 minutes break because we have a surprise. The Consulate General of India in Chicago is going to visit. So we'll have Hari Parshad Prabhu speak, and hopefully the Consulate General will have some good fortune of listening from Hari Parshad Prabhu. And whenever the Consulate General arrives, he will be speaking for... He said 12 to me. Okay. Okay.